and that's why I put appreciating hard work as a value there, because I think very often for a lot of people, they think that success is because this person has some inherent talent, right? They had some quality that allowed them to have an advantage, right? And again, I'm not saying that is not the case, but I think the majority of cases are people who are able to recognize that in order for me to get this, I need to work hard. I need to push back past some barrier, whether it be a personal barrier. I need to use the advantages that I have, which are the things that we say come easy to them. But there's always something that requires that extra effort. And success is for those that are able to take and push through whatever it is.
Hey, Kyle, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on today.
Hey, thanks, Mark. A pleasure to be here as well.
Fantastic. So kind of tell us where you're living right now, where you're originally from, and what are you up to, and where do you work?
Oh, man, the short version of the story is right now I'm in Toronto, Canada. I work at CashApp, which is based in the US. I came here from Trinidad, where I studied and worked for a few years, but I'm a native of St Vincent and the Grenadines.
Oh, didn't know. Okay, that's like
yeah. So it's a couple of jumps, and the reason I give that context because sometimes people. I lived like 10 years or something like that in Trinidad, so I picked up a bit of the accent. So people first guess is like, "Oh, you're from Trinidad," and I'm like, "Should I correct you?" It's too much trouble. So I just leave it. But I'm native, proud Vincy, living in Toronto.
Okay, then I'm even more excited because then you're the first guest from that place originally, which is exciting. Good. And tell us what you do at CashApp. I see on your LinkedIn you're a machine learning engineering lead for identity. What does that mean?
Oh yeah, that's like a buzzword, right? So I lead a team specifically looking at how to apply machine learning for identity verification. And so again, we could dive into this later on if you want, but maybe the summary or a nice high-level summary is that we're looking at ways to protect CashApp customers. As you could assume, CashApp is a peer-to-peer service, but I mean, it's now much bigger than that. So maybe I should be careful how I say that, but it's a financial application. And as you could assume, people have money there. It's a target for fraudsters. And what we want to do is to help customers to be confident that the people who are using CashApp, who they're interacting with, are legitimate actors. They're not bots, or they're not somebody who says that they're John, but is really junior somewhere in some random part of the world. So one is a protection standpoint, but the second part, which is probably the more exciting part, is looking at how do we create new opportunities in the financial space for people who would typically not be able to access these financial services. And that's sort of at the core heart of CashApp. And again, we're looking at it from an identity point of view. How do I know who you say you are? To enough confidence that financial bankers and all these people like, okay, we feel good letting you handle this money.
Interesting. So if I can maybe replay that to you from the perspective of there's this notion of the unbanked to some degree, or folks who, for whatever different reasons, don't necessarily have access to different financial mechanisms / products. And to some degree, with the data that you are accumulating or collating or building a new representation of folks, they can better give a typical financial institution that as an estimate, or even other, digital financial institutions like CashApp, much more confidence that they're good candidates for these financial products. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, maybe if I try to broaden it a bit more, is in the Caribbean, we have like social insurance numbers, we have social security, but very often what people don't often realize is that in order for you to create a bank account, you need to have a job, right? You can't create a bank account without a job, or at least maybe I should phrase it as a source of income.
Yes.
And again, and not just a source of income, but you also need a valid form of identification. Now, in the Caribbean, like generally speaking, majority of people have like national IDs. They have like a passport and stuff like that. So maybe that this problem may not be so obvious to them. It's like everybody could create an account. But in the United States, there are a lot of people who, for one reason or the other, do not have access to such a readily form of identification that is approved, right? They may be immigrants now transitioning into the system. They may be from the indigenous groups of people who have their own forms of identification. So their tribal ID is not necessarily a recognized form of ID. And again, the groups goes on people who are homeless or having difficulties with socioeconomic conditions. Again, there's a whole class of people for one reason or the other that are not able to access financial services. And the question is, well, how can we use information about them, whether that be their biometrics, whether that be metadata about them? Again, I can't go too deep into it because that across into the
intellectual property
side of the equation. But like what kind of information we could get either directly from them or from the internet, from their peers, whatever, to be able to give us enough confidence to trust that this person is legitimately who they say they are, so that we can trust them to have access to financial resources to be able to help alleviate them or build them up socioeconomically.
Interesting. And just my brain thinking through this problem. This is a very sparse data problem from the perspective of I have one person who is from this tribe and another person who's like a different immigrant, and they have different sets of data that don't match the typical system. And
we could talk for a long time on the problems, but maybe even bring it closer to the audience.
Yes.
as well, is that even when a person who is young, like they just transition from, again, in the conventions of the right of the child, as typically around 18 or so. You no longer, like before, like children who have accounts because that account is tied to their parent information.
Yes.
But what would happen, especially, again, I'm talking primarily in a US context, is that we refer to them as thin file. So thin file basically means that the information that the government has about their financial history is very limited because they just received a social insurance number. Social security number, social insurance numbers in Canada, right? So and because they're a thin file customer, when the system tries to say, okay, this person has given me their identification, do we know who they are, right? Most vendors would come back and say, no, we don't know who this person is because they have so limited amount of financial history. So even forgetting about the more extreme sides of the challenge, which is like the underbanked, even just the younger demographic who now transitioning into that financial independence have a significant challenge with this. And again, keep in mind, we could then say, okay, well, they could just provide us additional information and we could trust it. But, the thing, as you could appreciate with these financial applications, a lot of it is about making it easy or lowering the barrier to access. So if you could just put in your ID number and it works, great. But if you have to go now and find your passport or find your driver's license or find some other material to then just to be able to use an application.
Financial services, then.
It becomes frustrating. So again, and this is where, this sort of AI ML space kind of comes in to try to figure out what is the best way to support, people who are typically disadvantaged by the regular course of action, for one reason or the other. So rather than just saying, okay, sorry, you need to wait until you have more financial history, right? The question is, how do we bring them in and allow them to build that financial history through the use of CashApp?
Fantastic. And definitely sounds like a very meaty problem to solve. So, we do this show to encourage people from the Caribbean region, and now that I'm discovering to a larger degree everyone else, to pursue data-driven careers. So first, how do you sort of see machine learning and tech really impacting the Caribbean region? And then one level up from that would be what do you think folks entering the workforce, maybe in the workforce, what should they be thinking about in terms of the data space? And I like to describe the data space as not only data science, right? There are many other roles within a machine learning company that you can play. So any of your thoughts there are open.
I think, and maybe just quickly, I definitely think there is a huge need for more practitioners within the data space in the Caribbean.
Okay.
And again, I see that generally, and I think as a region, and I did some work regionally. I used to be part of like a group that did work across several English-speaking Caribbean countries. So generally, as a region, we have people who are equipped, able to make data-driven decisions. But very often, that is almost primarily from like a social impact dimension or a I want to say maybe, again, my knowledge is limited beyond my experience, but I think like very often the way that I've seen it work is like, okay, we want to create a program to help deal with teenage pregnancies. Okay, we have data and we use data to provide interventions or justification for interventions that are necessary. So that's sort of like where my experience came from. Yes. But I think generally speaking, there's a huge amount of opportunities for us to figure out, okay, like one challenge I was working with that I think could do with a lot of help is that we have a lot of illiteracy, right? A lot of people who reach to a certain level of education, and for one reason or the other, school just wasn't their thing, and there wasn't enough social security to help them to advance, so they just kind of like drop out and say, okay, whatever, right? But how do we then use technology and data-driven solutions to be able to say, okay, let's target interventions to help these kinds of situations, right? We have a fishing, generally speaking, we have a fishing community. Questions as to the extent to which it's being passed on to subsequent generations. But how can these industries benefit when they're small against large trawlers that just come exactly, right? You need something to drive that competitive edge, and one of the ways to drive that competitive edge is to use and to understand data, right? And again, they're not necessarily ones. I'm not saying like a fisherman needs to become data driven. I'm saying that there needs to be. I agree, but I just don't want to constrain the audience's mind to think that that's what I'm thinking, right? But I'm saying like there needs to be the availability of data practitioners that allow us to drive these industries that are strong or that have historical context in the Caribbean forward, because everybody else is doing this. The world is doing this, but we still think of fishing as, well, a man gets on a little boat with a little 2-cylinder engine in the back and he go and throw a net, and like we have not transitioned sufficiently. Again, I will say there are people who are thinking about it, but I'm saying broadly speaking, we still see these industries that has strength, that has potential in the Caribbean as traditional. Like we just see them as, that's labor intensive. Again, agriculture, did a lot of work in agriculture too, right? Fishing is another example. Even things like we used to produce cotton. Caribbean was well known for its cotton. We produce some of the best cotton in the world. And again, for one reason or the other, we have not, maybe with the exception of maybe the Bahamas, we have not really used data to be able to drive how can these industries still be relevant? How can we put this to use in a way that, despite our small size, can make this a viable industry? And again, I'm fully aware that many people have tried these things, but I'm saying that if there are more people that are inclined to make these types of data-driven analyses better or easier or more accessible, because part of the reason is that there's so few people and there's a scarcity problem, and sometimes we just don't have the framework to think about them either. It just becomes a hard problem to deal with. So again, I have many thoughts on this, but so I definitely think there's huge value for that across various industries within the Caribbean region.
So fishing is interesting, and sort of ocean conservation. We have several members of the sort of private group that we're in. I just interviewed Jonathan Pear. He's running a deep learning startup in the UK that uses satellite imagery to estimate farming yield And with that particular type of data, giving farmers access to financial products, very to some degree similar to what you're doing at CashApp, adding a data layer onto this to build a better profile of the person that you're maybe giving a financial product to. And there was an interesting thought experiment that I heard from a gentleman named Naval Ravikant. And he said, imagine what would happen if everyone had the knowledge of a hardware engineer and a software engineer, right? And something in your fisherman statement really resonated with me there, because I do think there's an interesting area of opportunity in the Caribbean for data collection, because we don't have as many rules around it. And there's lots of either computer vision applications, especially when it comes to NLP and conversational AI. You know, the shit that's out there is not going to understand our accents at all, especially once we're talking natively.
Oh man, I actually, while I was at the university, I did some work on that, and that is so true, man. That is so true. But yeah.
So I think from that particular statement, what I'm trying to communicate to the audience listening is your pursuit of both hardware and software skills, in addition to all this machine learning, data analysis, data engineering stuff, enables sort of that democratization within the region and whatever region you're in to add this data layer onto these traditional sort of industries that can bring something forward. So thanks for highlighting that.
Yeah. I mean, I have examples we could dive into, but let's not digress.
We could swing it back on the end. So great. You work at CashApp. CashApp is a big boy company. That's not a small company. And I think one of the unique things in your story that I want to discover is how you sort of came from Trinidad. So take us back to high school. Like, what were you like in high school? Were you a slacker? Were you a super studious student? And how did your mentality change from there going into like college?
Yeah. So going back to St Vincent.
Yes.
And so in
and St Vincent, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. In secondary school, I wouldn't really consider myself a slacker, but I was free-spirited.
Okay.
Right?
I like that word.
No, we'll leave that unqualified for the audience's imagination. But I would say it in the way, like, you know, I wasn't the brightest person in the class. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember, you know, I had peers who were at the time, you know, they were like the top tier of the country kind of thing. They topped the entrance exam to enter into secondary school. You know, mm-hmm. they came from really well. They would read a section or the textbook once, and they just seemed to get it. And I would be reading it 3-4 times and still struggle to understand what it is that they're trying to tell me and stuff like that. But I think, you know, in that period of time, what I understood is that the race is not really for those who are, in our local colloquial term, bright, right? The race is about determination. It's about pursuit. It's about hard work. I remember my primary school, I can't translate that to the local context, but my primary school had a mantra and said, it's only hard work that leads to success. I think that sort of like quotation. Ooh. That quotation kind of like resonated with me and shaped me in one way. And my secondary school quote was, it is rough ways through the stars. They said it in Latin, pastor ad astra. And again, you know, like these sort of things just kind of like resonate with you and kind of help me to be like, okay, I shouldn't get discouraged because I didn't understand the concept as quickly as another person. It just means that my road and my pathway is going to be a little bit more challenging than another person. And that's fine, right? That's just who I am. And in the balance of that, like my parents often allowed me to do other things beyond just academics, you know, so like I have an interest in community and community work. So I was allowed to be part of different groups and stuff like that during that period of time, and figuring out school life balance was not an easy process. But again, thankfully I did reasonably well. And then I transitioned to university. And so the question was, well, what should I study? Right. You know, that's often sometimes an unrealistic expectation. We have people in like barely start their life, and you're like, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? It's just like, I just start. Like, why such pressure, right? But you have to make a choice. You have to figure out the degree you want to study. And at the time, I chose computer science.
Oh,
because my naive expectation at that point is that, okay, I'm going to do, and again, just for short context, like before going to university, I mentioned I used to do work with a regional organization. I used to do work with CARICOM, and again, for the international community. CARICOM is Caribbean Community, which is like our version in the Caribbean of the European Union. And they had a youth program called the Caribbean Youth Ambassadors, which is basically just select some young people that they think have some leadership potential, and they tell them, hey, go and advocate for the issues for your youth in your respective countries. And we had the forum to talk to like our leaders and stuff like that. So it was a really good opportunity. But during that opportunity, it exposed me again to what we mentioned before, that there's a gap in our ability to collect, process, analyze data, especially as it gets large, right? If we could fit it into an Excel sheet, great. We have a lot of people who are really smart who could do a lot of work on that. But as data gets large, as we think about things like sensors, as we think about, being able to crunch and to process and to make decisions from the ever increasing volume of data, we need people who could do that. So I was like, oh, computer science seems like the best thing for me to do at the time. And I got into it, and again, it was exciting, it was interesting and stuff like that. And yeah, I didn't lean so heavily into the data at that time, because I was like, oh, there's so many things to learn, and I don't want to restrict myself. So I want to do everything that I could possibly. I want to do some mobile development. I want to do some web development. So ask me at another date if that was a good decision, but it was what it was. But again, like after that, and I was coming close to the completion, I realized I really had an interest in this thing. I really was passionate about this thing. And so I decided to go straight into my master's. And that's where I took a more deliberate decision towards the data analytical side of things, to and what we would call AI or ML. Again, there's a slight nuance between it, but yeah.
So you did sort of spend some time in your master's doing more data analysis, more formal machine learning stuff.
That's correct.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. Coming back to something you said in your high school journey, did someone introduce you to computer science? Because the reason why I asked that, like my dad had a computer company in my house, and at no point did like the word computer science in my entire existence up until 18 years old ever come into my purview. I'm not necessarily sure why that is.
I don't think so, to be honest. Like looking back, I have a family friend who I would refer to as my uncle. And it was only later in my life, like I learned that he did like computer science or computer engineering or something related to that degree. And I mean, nobody ever like, oh, computer science is the correct. So I don't really think that I had like a kind of pressure that I see a lot of people do, where they say like, oh, you need to go and deal with computers because computers are the future. Right? I never had, any of that kind of external pressure. I think it was more like, and like people would ask me sometimes, how did you get into it? It's like, I don't know. I just like computers. I was fortunate to be in a family that we were able to access a computer at an early age. I mean, as early as, and maybe I'm aging myself here, like Windows 95 had just come out, right?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's all there.
So
pressure.
Yeah, and there was just something about it that, I mean, I took apart computers sometimes to the stress of my father. Because again, it's not like today where you could get a computer for like, let me say $500, which is still expensive, but it's not like that. Like in that period of time, a computer was always over $1,000, right? Like there was no device that you could get with the name computer that was less than $1,000, which again, adjusted for inflation, is pretty huge.
Yes.
So again, it was just something that was part of it. I knew I loved sciences. I knew I was interested in it. And I think it's just through exposure and see the need kind of like pushed me into that particular direction.
Makes sense. And once you got to college, how did your mentality shift, right? Because you said in high school, you were very free-spirited and you got to University of the West Indies in Trinidad on the St. Augustine campus, and you were doing computer science. And one of the reasons why I'm really interested in your story is I think most of the success stories you see coming from the Caribbean tend to, those folks have studied in the US.
Yeah.
Whereas you did it differently, like another person, Larry Hercules, who was on the podcast as well, who went to UE and were able to sort of go abroad and still, make a big name for yourself. So tell us what your experience was like in college. How free-spirited did you become in that process? And in addition, what was your way of thinking and how did that change over time?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. And I do recognize that I agree with you, especially in the field of computing.
Yes.
You tend to see, and again, like a lot of the people that I've met in the diaspora, again, share similar backgrounds. Like, they came from like very young and stuff, and they went through the US or the
Canada and the UK.
Yeah.
One of those, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, like, was I still as free-spirited? I think, in a way, and free-spirited is not necessarily, it's like maybe borderline rebellious. Like, I had very good parents from the standpoint, like, they didn't interpret that what I was doing was rebellion. They was like, oh, he just kind of like finding his way. Mm-hmm. Right. But I think that was advantageous for me because when the time I came into university, you already had this understanding of self, which again, like, helped me to kind of like refine exactly what I wanted to do and why. I think generally speaking, I always had again, this is partly because of my exposure with the curriculum youth program.
Yes.
Is that, I had a understanding that I am not building myself to go back simply to my local country to work within the public sector, because just for international context, in the Caribbean, the majority of the employment is done by the public sector, right? But it's like, okay, how do we equip ourselves to make best of the use of the opportunities that we have? Yes, for individual advancement, right? But also, my individual advancement is my tool towards actually making a difference societally. So even up to today, being so far away from my home country, right? There's still things that we do that are aimed towards building our Caribbean region, right? I still involved with ICT programs. We have a Caribbean, it's SOUP. I can't remember what the I stands for, but it's a research program, right? It's basically, Caribbean information research program, right? Like, there's still opportunities and stuff to be able to make an impact, right? But because I now have experience, I now have the ability to deal with larger aspects of data. The volume of data that we deal with is huge. The access to computation that we have access to by being part of an organization like CashApp is huge. Like, I would not have had those opportunities in the Caribbean, right? But my heart is still in the Caribbean. But so going back to the original question, which is like, I recognize that I need to progressively advance in order to make a substantial impact home. Now, again, I have good friends who are still home and stuff like that, and we argue about this all the time, right? Like, where do you make the biggest impact, right? So I'm not putting a stake in the stand. I'm just saying that that's my personal journey, right? So I think that's part of it. It's like, okay, I want to go to the next level. What does the next level look like, right? I want to progress. So like, even when I did my master's, I did my master's at UE as well. It's like, well, why didn't you go somewhere else? It's, well, because I had an opportunity to teach, right, with the university, right? So, and that offered financial assistance that I would not have been able to have access to otherwise, right? But in doing so, it's like, even while teaching, it's like, well, what else? Like, what does the next level look like? How do I push to that next level? How do I achieve the things that I want to? So I think, again, going back to your question, is like, that internal drive is what I think helps to be able to see beyond the typical boundary of, well, this is UE, we're in the Caribbean, we help in our own type of thing. And again, there are many success stories in the diaspora from people who came from the Caribbean. But I think that constant thought process is what helps me to reach to where. And again, I had good mentors that pushed me as well. I don't want to discount to make it sound like it was self-fulfilling journey.
Absolutely.
Right. I had good mentors that opened my eyes to the possibilities and potential. I had a good partner that helped to say, like, why not? You know, like, what's keeping you here? You know, just let's pull the trigger, let's move, and let's see what happens.
Okay. And tell us about, so you were instructing, so I see online you're an instructor and lead software developer at university, and having taught at university myself, and now in customer facing roles in machine learning and data science, I sort of attribute, well, I have a lot of customer experience from like just having a company in my house. So you're waking up, you come in your living room and you just see customers there every day. So you kind of learn to operate. But beyond that, what was the value of your teaching experience, and how do you think that has influenced some of your data career so far?
Oh man, these are deep questions, man.
Yeah, sorry.
I think teaching, at least those years teaching with the university, I think those are really, really valuable years. And they were not easy because, again, I was teaching. It wasn't, and again, due to some logistics with the university, I ended up like teaching full courses with the supervision of a full-time lecturer, while not getting as much numerical compensation as you would expect for
standard operating procedure.
but again, it was a great experience. It was valuable. You know, I was in a position where, again, and because of my own background, not being, in quotation marks, the brightest, right, allowed me to have empathy towards students that were struggling, right? You know, like a student who might have failed an introductory programming course or like a data structures course. And again, and like one of my frustrations as a student was, we didn't really get much opportunities to practice the craft, right? We sat down, we did assignments, you know, we did, you know, what was required, and we finished. So again, all of that kind of motivated me, like, okay, which goes back to the question I was saying before, like, how do we push the boundary? How do we create new opportunities for this next generation that, you know, allow them to flourish or allow them to think through? And like, even there's a particular cohort that comes to mind. I don't want to call the names per se, but almost everyone from that cohort is, like, I would even argue in some ways that their careers are probably even further than mine, right? You know, they went to Europe, they went to, some of them heading like telecommunication, the data-driven sections of telecommunication companies in the Caribbean. Like they went from where other members of the academic faculty might have looked at them and say, well, you know, they fail some, you know, if you fail a course, they write you off, you know, like, what are you good for? But because, you know, again, my own personal context and my understanding and appreciation of what is needed for people, right? They were able to use these opportunities to push themselves further, to think as through mentorship, what does the next step look like? And they continue applying that principle and allow them to reach the very far places in their careers. So, and again, there's just one cohort that I could think of, but I think that pattern generally holds true for the years that I was with the university. And so transitioning that now into this sort of like customer role in this large company, it's the same question, right? Like, what does the next step look like? Like, how do you build a team? Because that's probably like 60% of my job now is just building a team. It's like, how do you build a team? And then you get them to think about the same steps. Like, what does the next step look like? Like, when I came to Canada, I joined a startup called Deep Learning.ai, and we rebranded to Dessa, which was eventually acquired by CashApp, right? But the reason why I found that startup was exciting, because the question was, what could we push the boundaries with deep learning in the financial space, right? It's like, you know, again, for context of the audience, financial space runs on tree-based XGBoost type algorithms, right? Like that's the standard, and again, it's not a standard just for standardistic. It works really well, right?
At scale as well.
Exactly. So I want people to understand that. I'm not downplaying it, but the question is like what's next? What's on the horizon? What comes beyond, you know, this standard? And again, this startup was sort of like answering that question. I was excited to be a part of that. You know, so even as you're building the team, you're like, hey, this is what we're doing now. But what's next?
The next step?
Exactly. You know, like,
I'm gonna print a jersey and just put what's the next step? Because now you have me thinking a lot as well. Interesting. So you finished teaching. You're in Trinidad at this point, I guess, so you might have probably went back home for some period of time, depending. What was your transition like to Canada, and how did you discover that particular opportunity?
Okay, so the transition point, I left teaching. So I used to do teaching and software development at the same time.
Okay.
Again, because sometimes people say, oh, teaching is for those who can't
Don't know.
practice.
Yeah.
Right.
You throw it out the window.
Yeah. I keep that statement out far away. Right. So again, at the time, I was leading like 3 or 4 different software development projects that were across multiple countries in the Caribbean.
Wow.
In the space of agriculture and fisheries and stuff like that. So, I mean, like relatively speaking, it was good, but it was like, well, what comes, going back to the thing, it's like, like, because I'm leading the teams, like, what's the next thing? The next thing is just, again, same process, applying for another grant, building out, it's just like a repetition of the same thing. So it's like, okay, what's a new challenge? And again, that's what kind of led me to this. Like, I even had competing offers between this startup company and working in AWS.
Okay.
With Amazon Web Services. And I was like, what's Amazon Web? I know what Amazon Web Services, right? Because we know people who've been there. I wanted to be part of this exciting new wave of deep learning and stuff like that. But that transition to Canada, it's not an easy transition. Especially for people, young professionals who are thinking of, I'm going to leave where I am to go to North America because it's better. I don't have any complaints or anything, but I think we should be careful about identifying or that sort of mindset. Again, it's a mindset that's been around for generations, right? So I don't think that's going to change overnight. But I think, we should be careful about automatically assuming that. And again, the reason I say this, like, for example, I came from having a strong network in the Caribbean, right? We knew a lot of people, we built a lot of relationships across multiple countries in my respective home, right? We, again, same thing. But when you move to a new place, it's like blank slate, right? It's like, I mean, I have friends and stuff like that from secondary school who are also in Canada. And again, you have co-workers and you're building that up, but it's almost like resetting to zero, right? It's almost, you have to go over this process of building relationships and building respect, because those relationships and respect open new opportunities for you. So it's literally resetting the clock to zero. And like, one of the interesting phenomena, which might be more on the jovial side, is that I came from the Caribbean, where when I entered the room, I was like the youngest person in the room, consistently. But when I came to Toronto, I became like the oldest person in the room in the space of a week, right? From the time I left to the time I arrived in Toronto, it's like the dynamics are just totally different, right? So again, it's good and bad, because because of that age, you have a little bit more experience and stuff like that. But in North America, they don't care about the age. It's like, well, let your work be the judge of who you are, and if you're worthy of respect. Right. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's definitely been an interesting transition. We came just on the heel of COVID. So I've literally worked more from home than I've worked in an office in Toronto. But even in the midst of that, we were able to build good relationships and experience, and we could see the trajectory of how things would be good.
Fantastic. Yeah. And even, I've been in NVIDIA for just over a year now, and I haven't met anyone from there yet. And it's quite interesting coming to a new company, and you're talking to someone, you've gotten to know them over some time, but you're like, I actually never really met you in reality. And I think this is a blessing for the Caribbean region. So you made a statement there that when you leave your home, or you leave your place of strength and you come to a new place, you are now in a vulnerable position to some degree. You don't have your contacts. And oftentimes, like in the Caribbean, is like who is a big function, or has a strong component in your success to some degree, right? Let's just leave it there. And with that in mind, I think people in the Caribbean now can have a global network. Like, there's no excuse for you to have a global network, and everyone in the world is like, oh yeah, I'll hop on a Zoom call with you, and we're in completely different countries. Cool, it's all good. How do you now if you were home in whichever region of the Caribbean, or for others that may listen at some point, whatever remote region in the world you are, or even if you feel like you're isolated within your environment, what would you do to start over again? Given that this global kind of outreach thing is a little more of the norm.
Oh man, I feel like these questions get progressively deeper. But
pressure.
So this is a really good question, and I think it's not an easy, like I'm careful how to answer it.
Sure. From your context within, the purview of how you have lived, naturally what you say will not necessarily generalize to many people. All I want you to just,
well, it's more like
your heart,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more like it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves as the restrictions and stuff like that of the pandemic, release, right?
Yes.
So I think, and again, I agree with you 100%, man. I have good relationships with people in Australia. I meet with them every Monday. Have good relationships with people in the heart of Silicon Valley. So I mean, it and that would not have been as possible to build that relationship if we were not equally forced to have this online mode of operandi in work, right? So that being said, I think one of the things that used to bother me when I was home in the Caribbean is that I would often feel like, I'm in a country that if I tell people where I'm from, they have no idea where to see it, right? And again, for the audience's appreciation, if you have a globe, like a circular globe, and you look for St. Vincent on the map, you're not guaranteed to see it. That's just frame of mind, right? And so when you explain, it's like you have to tell people, Rihanna? Like, yeah, Rihanna. You know where Rihanna's from? She's like, yeah, some a country called Barbados. It's like, okay, so if you're in Barbados and you go west, you'll reach to my country. Like that's the length that you have to go through to explain to somebody where you're from. So very often, because you had that mindset, it will become difficult to say, okay, let me send an email out to this person or send a thing out to this person. Would they respond? Would they want to connect? Would they want to build, that sort of relationship for the
because you come from such a small place, and to some degree globally it's insignificant from a geographic size perspective. You translate that into maybe they won't pay as much attention to me to some degree.
That's right. And so I think like having, again, this exposure and meeting so many groups of people in different levels of importance, I kind of realized that's a facade. That's a lie. That's that, like, we should find a way to break that sort of mindset. Because if you have an idea that is valuable, or you have a proposal, or you have something that's valuable, it should not be and you're convinced of its value, you should not let any other constraint of resources or visibility or acknowledgement or whatever keep you back from reaching where you need to reach. So I think like that's one of the things I would tell my past self. It's like, don't worry about it. Shoot the email. What's the worst that'll happen? They'll just ignore it. And no loss to you, right? But so I think it has opened up reduced that barrier to entry, where I don't have to be physically in the space of Silicon Valley to be able to meet bright minds who are interested in new ideas that could potentially change the world, because we have grown a little bit more used to or open to the idea that valuable connections and partnerships could happen over the internet, which is strange, come full circle, because really truly that's what the internet was created for.
Right.
But yeah, again, I would push past that barrier.
Even this interview is, and even as you're saying that, you're pushing things up the queue in my mind, if I could try to be computer sciencey, in that I don't think I would have maybe pushed to try to do this show if the pandemic wasn't necessarily there. I would not have thought that, how would I reach all of these people? Why would they want to talk to me? Because I'm just in this region. I'm in Florida. Okay, I'm from Trinidad. We have some kind of connection of being from the same place, but they're just like, Why is this sort of relevant? And okay, that's you're making me think quite deeply there. Within some of the statements that you just mentioned, you said something about relationship and respect, and how the quality of your work should really be the defining factor as to how you put yourself out there. What is it that motivates you to kind of work so hard? That really interests me about people. Are you obsessive about it to some degree?
I think so. I push back on it. It's like an internal struggle. This is why it's taken me a while to answer the question. Like it's an internal struggle. I definitely think that there is value in this pursuit. There's a value in pursuing things and pursuing things, passionately and vigorously and stuff like that. But the pushback, again, like for context, I just recently had a daughter who's like 3 months. So I'm in this process of restructuring effort, right?
Yes.
But I think like going back to like, I'm the kind of person like I would push hard into the night to make sure like things are accomplished. Again, I also have an academic background, so like even some of the work that we're doing is like let's understand the space. Let's do the deep research. Let's
do your review, know what exactly is happening out there, and then make it move.
Like even with the team, like sometimes I'm careful. It's like I wonder if I'm being applying too much pressure. It's like, hey, like don't come and tell me we're doing this. Come and tell me why we're doing this. What's the justification? Prepared to get pushback from me because I need to know that you have made the right decision in terms of thinking through all the possibilities and so fantastic. Like on one way I could say yes, like definitely about that. I think going back to the question of like why put so much effort, I think there's just so many problems that require us to do a good job. So again, going back to like why I'm interested in CashApp is because the idea or the motivation that we could be creating financial opportunities for people who would be otherwise disadvantaged, it feels noble to me. Yes, CashApp will be profitable. Yes, the work that we do helps to make CashApp profitable, but CashApp needs to be profitable in order to help people who are
have
not
the impact,
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's something that I wrestled with. Again, coming back from my roots in social activism and working with, it's like why does everything have to be profitable? And I realize it's because that's the only model of sustainability that we have that actually works, right? So I think, again, I'm going to ruffle some feathers. I know people who have ideological differences, right? But I think so. It's like I believe that the work and the effort that I'm putting into it, yes, makes CashApp profitable, make CashApp successor, but in doing so, will hopefully open up financial potentials and possibilities
at scale. By the way, right? That's I guess the key differentiator there, right? Not necessarily other people doing the same work will have impact on, but it'll just be on a way smaller scale. So
yeah, I mean, and even to that at scale, I have to be careful how much I say, okay. But yeah, but like again, I don't think this is a brain. This is releasing anything that is controversial. Okay, you have to expect that even if we solve the problem in the US, that's not really. That's just. That's huge, but that's not really is that really what's next? What's next is, and again, those who know Jack Dorsey, who is the CEO for Block, which is the overall company, right? Knows he has a heart for Africa, right? So it's not inconceivable that Block would be looking at countries where
other regions.
Exactly, right. And that's where the real scale comes in, right? Not in the US because you have a few set of people who underbank for one reason or another. But what about a country that just doesn't have infrastructure that we typically take for granted, like a national identification system? Like, how do you scale? And that's now in the tens of millions, right, of people, right? So, and so that's the vision that pushes me. And again, it goes back to, I just want to make sure that the things that I'm doing, the effort that I'm putting my time is helping, humanity on a whole get better, and again, this goes back to my belief of AI and ML is that its utility is most valuable in those pursuits. Now, people pursue it for art. Again, we could argue about that. People pursue it for pursuit of its purposes, and I think each person finds what resonates with them the most. But I would argue and suggest even to professionals, it's like the more that you're able to master these complex algorithms, master the utilization of data that we're just discarding for one reason or the other, and you could frame that in a context that is sustainable. Okay, you know my model of sustainability.
Yes.
To be able to build systems that build people's lives or whatever the case is, there's a huge value to be derived from that intrinsically, but even economically.
Well, that was, I appreciate you sharing some of those things. And sometimes you always wonder why people work so hard. So now it makes a lot more sense as to sort of what drives you. Tell us about your journey at DESA and more specifically, like working in a startup. What's very big for me that I try to communicate, or things that I want to share, is executive visibility, and how important that is when you do work, that there is to some degree executive visibility on the quality of work that you do and its corresponding impact. So can you tell us about your journey there? And maybe, I'm sure the work that you did was quite visible, even though it was a startup as well, right?
I mean, it was a small startup.
Okay.
And so I think visibility is without a doubt, because, everything you do
is just you.
Yeah. It's like if we walk into the room, like everybody, the whole company could fit into a single meeting room, right? It was small. But it was a small group of energetic, really smart. Yeah. I mean, people on top of their game in terms of like deep neural network and ML ops and stuff like that, and all these kinds of things, So it was really, really high energy. Working at a startup is like people romanticize startups, and I think startups are necessary. And I say romanticize it because, like, when I got into the startup, it was good, but we reached to a point where it was like, okay, we need to ensure that what we are doing has product market fit, because we saw the runway, right?
You see the end.
You see the end. And again, like even emotionally, like it's rough, because again, I came to Canada with a work visa at the time, so it's like, well, if this company tanks back home, right?
Yeah, you're done.
Right. But so again, but again, it was a good experience, high energy. We had fun doing it. We made some significant breakthroughs in what we considered at the time to be valuable from a temporal utilization of data within the financial space, which we were able to use as well at CashApp and stuff like that. So again, really, really valuable. Going back to the aspect of visibility at work, I think it was important, and because I came in from the Caribbean. What's my exposure? My exposure is building systems that scale across multiple regions. Great, but was it most amount of transactions per second we get? Maybe like 1,000.
Wow.
Per second. I mean, that's still a lot, but that's not as much as some of these larger companies are dealing with. So, like, even in that way, you have to kind of like quickly level up your capabilities to that. And then you come in a room I was hired as a senior person. And so you come in a room, people looking at you to making, decisions and stuff like that. And so again, you have to make critical decisions, because we had like deadlines. There's always the desire, those who are in software engineering would be familiar with this. There's always a desire, like, okay, we have a deadline, so we have to cut corners. Like, what corners do you cut? Like, why are you cutting that corner, right? And a lot of pushbacks. Sometimes work went as late as like 7 PM. We just arguing about and some of it is philosophical.
Yes.
Positions. So it's like, even like, like I personally had to like put aside, like, am I arguing this because this is good, or this is a philosophical belief that I have about what software development should look like, and helping other people of the team to see that, so that we could come to those kinds of decisions and stuff. So that was really a core part of even my own transition and stuff like that. And I think that in part had a large degree of what CashApp would have saw, why they decided to keep me on as part of the team and stuff like that. Again, which I do even up to today. I sometimes think I ruffle a lot of feathers unnecessarily, but it's about asking questions, right? It's like why are we going with this route, right? Why are we going with AWS? Why are we going with GCP? Why are we using it? Why are we not building it on our own? Why are we building it on our own? There needs to be somebody who visibly challenges assumptions and ensures that we are on the right track. If that gives you the reputation that you're a difficult person to work with, I don't think that it is. I just feel like there's a fear of that, but I'm not going to let that fear stop me from asking those questions.
Yeah, I think I've been experiencing sort of the same thing at NVIDIA, right? Where you come on these big calls and you're like, hey, what about this? What about that? What about that? And I think the thing that you said about, hey, you're from this small island. Who the hell are you to say something? I have to like put that aside every day. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to just ask the question and like, do you want to fire me or whatever? Like, whatever. Like, I'll go find something else, type thing.
I mean, these larger countries have like a way of defining it, right? They call it the imposter syndrome. I learned about the imposter a few months back, right? But I mean, it's a valid thing. It's a real thing. And I think, especially coming from smaller countries, I think that's just a component that we need to recognize and be able to address that imposter and say, hey, you don't worry about that. We're just going to put forward our thing. We know what we know. We know our knowledge and the boundaries of that knowledge, and we can push forward accordingly in the spaces that we're confident in. And again, I think professionally, that's just what everybody does. But it's important to recognize that sometimes because you're from, especially me having come up, I don't have like a nice long pedigree, though I'm very proud of my University of the West Indies education, right? Compared to sitting with somebody who say they're from MIT or other cases, like sometimes it's easy to fall back and be like, is my UE education matches up to this? It's like, yes, right? And even not just my UE education, but the fact that I am a diligent person, that I'm going to pursue knowledge just like everybody else. We have access to the same resources. We have access to the same, again, thankfully, a lot of knowledge has been democratized and stuff like that now with Coursera and all these other tools that exist. But again, recognize the imposter and deal with them.
Yeah, and coming back to your statement from your primary school or your high school, it's only hard work that leads to success. So you're a fine example of that in that, hey, you got acquired by CashApp, which is not an easy thing for a startup to do. And what was that experience like in getting acquired by a large company, coming into a bigger enterprise that's super formal? And I don't know anyone that works at CashApp, but most Silicon Valley companies are very serious about engineering. So there's engineering at a startup, and then there's engineering like at scale with way more, just a bigger room of very, very talented people. What's that experience been like?
Oh boy. I after trying to find ways to keep these answers short, right? I think the experience, I think I don't know if anything else to say other than say just enlightening, right? Because when we were brought in, we brought in as a unit, and the idea was, hey, we want to inject more deep neural net, because that was our specialty, right? Our specialty was deep learning. And so it's like, okay, how do we apply deep learning to different aspects or components of the business?
Yes.
Right. And so a lot of our talent and stuff like that went into addressing those problems, so like figuring out like, okay, these systems were built for XGBoost, or libGBN or whatever, right? Let's call it tree-based models, right? Like to put a deep neural network there, that's not possible because a tree-based model could fit in memory, but so like we had to think through, and then we cannot disrupt business because we want to put something new. So we have to think creatively of how to apply and bring in all these kinds of principles. And
you have to ask a lot of, why are we doing this? Why are you disrupting my business? How much money is this deep neural network will make me?
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. And I think maybe this is something that I don't know if a lot of people know about CashApp, but CashApp, the way Jack Dorsey runs his companies is like he thinks of it as like an ecosystem of startups, right? So Block has what we know as Square, which is what is the most recognizable thing, which is like the card reader and all the business commercial side. And you have the music one from Jay-Z. I can't remember right now.
Is it music?
they acquired this music company from Jay-Z.
Musically?
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
A competitor to Spotify.
Oh, not Pandora.
No. Why is the name slipping? Anyway, it doesn't matter that right now.
Yeah.
Right. But so he has all these things, and he pushes these companies to try to remain agile in its approach.
Interesting.
We have organizational principles, and the organizational principles reinforce this sort of thing. So every time we went to a team, it was like, hey, look at these organizational principles. Allow us to do these things because it fits into these organizational principles, right? And again, we never, like, I think working in CashApp was amazing because we expected to get pushback, right? Every time we went to like the big banks in Canada, right? You know, these financial institutions, it was like a lot of pushback. The same questions that you're asking. How much is this going to make me? You know, like those kinds of stuff. When you go in CashApp, it's like, oh, that sounds really cool. How are we going to do that? What do you need from us to do that? We're like,
wow,
you know,
very different.
And I think that again speaks a bit to the culture of the organization and fact that it has these principles that it's keeping people in check. And even as it grows at scale, growth in CashApp has been tremendous. They're still going back to these kinds of ways of thinking so that we don't get bogged down into it. So yeah, I think just generally speaking, really, really well. When we got pulled into this identity space, it was the same thing. It's like, hey, we have this problem, and we need some creative out-the-box thinking to address this problem. And then they took a couple of us from the acquisition and say, hey, we think you all know what you're doing. They put together a team and set us on our way. And so part of our work is risk mitigation, which is preventing bad actors, but part of it is the creative side of it, which is opening up new opportunities.
Fantastic. So, you know, now that we've sort of gotten a purview of your career so far, we want to enter the section of what would you do if, and in addition to that, you know, what do you want other people to know that you think will accelerate their own journeys, given the experiences that you've had? So I'm going to ask you a couple of different questions. So I think we understand to some degree where some of your motivations are coming from, asking what is next? Always continuously, it seems, throughout your entire career, asking that question. And what makes you really good at your job? And I'll ask you the question now. Next one after that will perplex your mind a little bit. But and the reason, let me give you a little background as to why I asked that question. I've been toying with the idea, or reflecting on the idea of what is it of your gifts? Okay, what is it that you do really well that comes very easy to you, but is difficult to others? Whether or not it's sort of like useful in the marketplace, but let's maybe push the ones that are useful in the marketplace maybe higher up the stack. And it's okay to take some time to think. It's good.
I think it changes from moment to moment. So maybe this is not a static answer.
Cool.
The one I would say that is valuable right now is, again, to help. I use the word vision casting. Using casting sound like it's some kind of magical something, but you know, like how do you formulate a vision? How do you get a team on board with a vision? How do you motivate your stakeholders and your other partners to buy into that vision, right? Again, just for visibility as well, a machine learning team can't say, oh, we're going to add this new feature into CashApp, right? You know, there's a product team, there's engineering teams, there's platform teams, there's mobile teams, right? So there's a lot of negotiation that has to go through to get, you know, something that is even like that out of the window. And so a lot of the effort and stuff that we've been doing is really around vision casting and even relationship building.
Yes.
You know, as far as I could remember, I don't know if there's anything special about me, but I'm grateful for this. Like I've always had the ability to connect with people and have good relationships with people and stuff like that. So I see that as very valuable because going back to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing in the Caribbean is who you know, that kind of like forced you to be like, okay, if that's the case, then I need to know more people.
Yes.
So even bringing that mindset into it is important. Not because you think it's going to give you any favor, which is how people would typically translate that thing. But when you know people and you understand and the process of getting to know somebody, you understand what's motivating them. You understand what's important to them. What is their priorities? You understand like how are they thinking about the business and how are they protecting or managing their team to accomplish particular tasks. So when you have all of that understanding, then that helps you to internalize, how do I pitch my vision to them? How do I ensure that my vision is in alignment with what they want to accomplish, at least to find the pieces of overlap that gives you a higher chance of success. So, and again, like, we didn't really talk about this before, but even in university, like I didn't have the easiest of time either. I don't want anybody to feel like I was a rock star student, like, passing through grades, right? I failed one course during my undergrad degree, right? Which was traumatic because like I'm going home to tell my family I failed a course at university. Like that was a traumatic experience. But like one thing I understood then is like, and my problem was like I was trying to figure this out on my own. Why am I trying to figure it out? I have peers who are figuring it out too. So I became dependent. I figured out how to lean on others to be able to help push the whole group forward. And even that thinking coming into CashApp is like I have peers who also based in Toronto or based in other places. Like we all are struggling with similar things, and the ability to now say, hey, let's struggle together, or let's find pieces that we are working on that have overlap and solve those problems together. So
you're the first guest. So the question that I typically ask that you answered without even knowing is, the hypothesis is, because we're from the Caribbean region and grew up in sort of like multicultural environments, etc., we have a natural propensity to relate to people a lot easier than other cultures. And with that, that's some inherent, it is an inherent, I don't like to call it an advantage. It's just an extra factor that we have when we enter a global workforce and we view ourselves as part of a collective. So do you want to add anything to that on top of what you've shared?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we live in an interesting time, right? I mean, our children are going to look back and our grandchildren are going to look back and it's going to be an inflection time. I'll give an example why I say it, right? So I have really good friends that are Muslims, right? And Hindus, right? And atheists and Christians and whatever, different religious background. I'm just choosing religion as a dimension here. But you could easily apply this to ethnicity.
Yes.
Right. So, and again, I learned this in Trinidad because St Vincent is not necessarily as diverse as Trinidad, right? You would go to them. So for Eid, you'll go and you'll sit and you'll have a meal. For Diwali, you'll go and you'll sit and you'll have a meal. For Christmas, you get invited and you have a meal. And that's just part of how things are, right? You somebody having a birthday celebration, you go and you have a puja with thing and get covered with smoke. That's just part of the experience, right? So so when you now in this multicultural place, in my mind, that's the expectation. It's like I already did that. But even as progressive as Canada is in terms of its acceptance of these multiple religions, it's not as
integrated, maybe, right?
That's right. It's not as warm. It's not as welcoming. It's like one time I know Diwali was coming up and I have a guy who works at me who's I know to be Hindu. So I'm like, hey, we getting sweets out, we coming over for some roti. And he's like, you want to come? I was like, I assumed there was going to be an invitation, right? So and that just breaks down barriers because it takes them off guard because they're like, whoa, we're not expecting that, and again, that goes miles to be able to help with relationships as well, so I think recognizing that and embracing that and being able to speak to that just makes dealing with people so much easier because again, and we have good reasons why it's not always easy to talk about religion because people have used religions in very negative ways, right?
Yes.
But knowing somebody's religion and knowing what they believe and stuff like that, even if you don't personally believe it or whatever, just being able to talk to them and acknowledge whatever they're thinking is a good conversation starter or even a barrier breaker to make a breakthrough to somebody, That
was very well, nicely said. That was terrible English. And I think I wanted to abstract some of the topics in there, right? If we could maybe speak machine learning there, in that it's not only enough to respect where someone is coming from and to give them space to not necessarily express that, or just give them space to exist within your particular global space, but it's more so people from the Caribbean tend to integrate more, like, hey, let me come into your space and feel what it is that you're feeling, and oh, come into my space. And it's all blended spaces versus a series, just a bunch of smaller boxes in a big box, right? It's very fluid to some degree. So cool.
Let me give you another one that blows people's minds, right? So I did this 23andMe test, the genetic test that showed the breakdown and composition, right? So it'll take me a while to pull it up here. But when I show them like my background and how my background have so many colors, like it blows their mind, they're like, you have Indian in you? It's like, yeah, my great grandfather on my mother's side was an Indian man. He used to puja every day, right? And they're like, what? But we don't see any Indian in you. Like, what are you talking about, right? Like, or I tell them, like just by showing them that and breaking them, because even now, and our companies and stuff, rightly so, have corporate policies to help manage these types of relationships, because it's not an easy road to navigate. But I think for us to appreciate the Caribbean, we have more practice. We have been forced in some ways. And again, because of the nature of our schools and stuff like that, we have more of that mixing.
Yes.
And I think our generations have done a much better job. I think that even maybe our parents and grandparents, right? And I think that's just a strength in itself, because many people are trying to figure this out, right? As you have migrant countries and workforces pulling talents from all over the place, all over the world. How do you integrate that in the workplace? Like, how do you deal with that without stepping on people's toes? How do you have a mindset that my way is not necessarily the only way, right? Or at least I might think my way is the right way, but that don't mean I can't respect somebody else's way or embrace their way or welcome their way. And I don't even use the word tolerance, because tolerance has negative allocations to it. Because tolerance means is like, well, I just not offended.
I just dealing with you for now, but ain't really.
yeah. And I think again in the Caribbean we're still working it through. I don't want to paint a bed of roses,
sure, absolutely,
right? But I think we're much further along that conversation than many people are in the world. And this is, I'm now saying this because I am in a position of management, in addition to practicing. But from a managerial point of view, nobody has to force me to be like, oh, you need to ensure that your candidate pool is diverse. It's like, I want my candidate pool to be diverse, right?
Yeah.
Because it would be boring if it was just one set of people, right?
Yep.
And it's just easy. It's just easier to interact and to deal with those kind of things. Right? If I was eating macaroni pie every day of the week, I love macaroni pie, but that's boring. I need to throw little doubles in the middle. I need to put a little jerk chicken in the middle. I need to have some sweets that have some kind of nut that I never heard about in the middle. It just, the variety. It's just easier to deal with that way.
Great. I appreciate you sort of calling that out, and I think even myself as a multiracial person, like I have Chinese, Indian, African, Portuguese. So people just look at me like, what? That ain't making no sense. And I think even in my own thinking, like I'm a part of everything to some degree, right? And Chinese as well. So just integrating across the front, I don't like to say ethnicities, just vibing with people overall in work and just building those good relationships is always a good thing. So great. So I have a couple of questions as we get closer to the end. What are 3 principles you live by? And I think I picked up certain things along the conversation, but if you want to surface them up to the top.
Yeah, I think 8 principles, boy. One principle that I hold above every one, maybe in a way that I could verbalize easy, is, to treat others as you would like to be treated. Again, people would be able to figure that where that kind of comes from. Yes. Right. But I think, like, just generally speaking, it's easy for me to know how to deal with somebody because I'm empathetic. So I could put myself in a person's position like, how would I want to be treated? How would I want to to be dealt with in a situation like that, so that's definitely one. The second one is like, integrity above else, right? There are cases where, you want to be honest and accurate and precise, right? One of the things that people often do is they try to beat around the bushes, like, oh, they have a deadline coming up, you want to beat around the bushes, like, oh, we think it's like, no, upfront. These are the issues, right? And I think people appreciate that honesty, even if it's not always the best news. And again, going back to verbalizing disagreements and stuff like that. So I think that's definitely one. Maybe the last one centers around appreciate the value of hard work. And so hard work. It's funny because I have an uncle. While I was in Trinidad, there's a family friend who is so close we call him uncle, right? That's a very Caribbean thing, right? And he's a farmer, right?
Yes.
So like it used to be funny when I used to think about hard work, because I'm like, oh, that man works hard, right? Yes. But it's more after a while you start to appreciate, like, and he was the one who actually pointed out to me, it's like, when I come one evening, I'm tired, and I go to sleep, but you still up working your brain, hours into the night to figure out some of these difficult problems. So, like even though I have a desk job, in quotation marks, even I reject that terminology, but again, I use it because people are quick to use it as a term to dismiss the difficulty and the hardness of the work that we do.
Yes.
Right. But yeah, you work hard, you put in the effort, and people romanticize it and they say, oh, you get your reward. Man, there are plenty of things I put real effort into that didn't pan out. Right. And then I turn around and I tell people, I feel like I have learned more from my failures than I have from my success.
Interesting.
And even that is again the value of working hard. Because if I saw like, okay, I was gonna fail, and I'm like, all right, okay, I could just give up now. It's like no, I already started this thing, I'm gonna push it forward as much as I could reach. Wherever it falls, but I don't want to ever look back and say I didn't do the best that I could do, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, like I have the most respect for you, Mark. You finish a PhD, people don't appreciate how difficult that could be, right? My cousin, again, for context, I didn't finish mine, but while I was doing mine, my cousin said, oh, you're a professional student. And I'm like,
yo, that used to get me all the time, man.
I'm like, so, professional students, like, you seriously underestimate how difficult it is to sit down and to read papers and be forced to have to come up with something novel and then do experimentation to prove that that is hard work, right? And it's valuable hard work. It might not be to somebody else, but that's all right, right? There is value in all of these things that helps us to break through barriers that we oftentimes don't even fully understand while we're going through them.
Yeah, I think one of the things I wanted to highlight as you brought that up, I don't like school. Like, I actually hate school. When people are like, oh, you have a PhD, like, oh, you want this? I didn't do shits about that, right? And for me, what I look for in people, or what I quietly look for, is what is your ability to handle shit that you don't like to do.
That's right.
Right. And I measure, like, I'm like, okay, you could handle this much. And, if I can endure all those years of doing something I didn't want to do to get to something that I did want, right, which was access to a larger work market that will recognize my skills and reward me, et cetera, correspondingly. And I always kind of say, like, the smartest people, quote unquote, don't finish PhDs. Is really the most persistent. And I actually spoke to a friend, and this man is absolutely brilliant physicist, just animal, and he's struggling in writing his dissertation. And I'm like, hold up, you could solve quantum computing, but like writing a document is stressful. So it's very interesting that certain things really block people from sort of achieving their goals. And that's why I had asked all those questions of what is it that comes kind of easy to you. Writing didn't come no easy to me, because in grammar class and literature class, I was a real fool. So, but now I even appreciate that more. And I wish I had taken writing more seriously, because I think I would be much richer just because with the skill of writing. But that is, yeah.
And that's why I put appreciating hard work as a value there, because I think very often for a lot of people, they think that success is because this person has some inherent talent, right? They had some quality that allowed them to have an advantage, right? And again, I'm not saying that is not the case, but I think the majority of cases are people who are able to recognize that in order for me to get this, I need to work hard. I need to push back past some barrier, whether it be a personal barrier. I need to use the advantages that I have, which are the things that we say come easy to them. But there's always something that requires that extra effort. And success is for those that are able to take and push through whatever it is that they're dealing with. And I mean, I make this generalization knowing fully well that there are people in different socioeconomic conditions that deal with that. But I think generally speaking, that principle is true.
And, even though, we're coming on time, I think one thing that I've thought a lot about is it's all relative. So we've been given X amount of opportunities, so we have to achieve X amount more, because when our particular ancestors came here as labor in whatever form or fashion, they did not have those opportunities and had to expend the same effort but get way less reward than we are able to sort of get these days. And it's quite interesting from that perspective to remind us that, hey, like, we can achieve a lot more by really pushing. So I'm stoked that you push super hard. So as we wrap up here, quickly, what are I want to respect your time. What are pieces of advice that you have for a high schooler? I'll just leave it to one: a high schooler, a college person, and a professional.
So I think a high schooler, what I would say is, don't be too fixated on the future.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
I think enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy, or I should say, pursue the path of enjoyment or the greatest degree of satisfaction. Right. For me, the greatest degree of satisfaction was sciences, and again, that was advantageous for me in this way. But I have friends who loved business and wanted to be successful business people, did that, and they're doing well with it. And I know people who have been forced to do sciences because their parents said that was going to open the most opportunity, right? That's going to open the most opportunity, and they didn't like too much after, and it just made them disgruntled somewhere along the path. So I think understanding what you like and why you like it, and pursue that. And again, I even have a cousin, again, just to give an example, who's a fashion designer.
Oh,
and
cool.
And she pursued her passion, and hasn't been the easiest of roads,
Yes.
But I think that passion just continues to push her, and she's received acclaim and stuff for that. Still on her road of success, but it's the passion that allows you to drive it through. For the going into college, university person, I would say, is to make sure that you have fun while doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think university years can easily suck the life out of you. Especially if you're pursuing something that is hard.
Yes.
Right. It could easily it could change you in ways that you don't often fully conscious of until you're looking back at it. I think it's important to make sure that life is about balance. Balance that hard work with times of relaxation. Not as to say that it needs to be equal, because that might get you into trouble, but ensure that you work hard, but you play hard. Whatever play translates to you. And I think as you're transitioning from that university into that professional life, I think realize that maybe one of the best assets that you have is integrity. Integrity of your work, integrity of your ability to say what you can and what you can't do. Some people tell people that they could do everything, which sets them up for failure, right? Know your boundaries and know when to say no. I think that's probably one of the hardest things that I've had to learn professionally, is like, okay, I could do it. I could learn to do it, but I think right now I just can't. And so again, I think those would be like my 3 life development things that I would look back and encourage my younger self to do.
Fantastic. Trust I think, and I want to put it in my pocket right now. That last one. And the last question, and even though hoping you have a little more time, is what are 3 books you recommend? Also, are you a reader?
Yeah, I read.
I'm so jealous,
I
jealous.
oh well, I let me qualify that. I put in as much time as I can to read as
To
much as
read,
I
yeah.
can.
Okay. Does
Um,
it come natural to you, or
oh
like
no,
it's
no,
something you?
no,
Okay,
no.
okay.
Reading is hard. Reading
Mm-hmm.
is really, really hard. What I've been reading recently, and I think is a common book. I think it's popular. Atomic Habits.
Yeah. It's
Heard a
funny. You
lot of
have books that you just don't read. Like I have that book there, and I just haven't read it. But every single person has told me to read it.
yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's like a slow process to me. But
Okay.
somebody mentions, like, I used to feel guilty that I didn't read a book to completion. Like I'll start off all hot and sweaty, and then I'll read somewhere to the middle, and then I'll be like, okay, life. So I used to feel guilty about that. Like, am I not a closer? Am I not a finisher? Like, but then somebody was kind of shaping a references. Like sometimes you get all that you need to get from the book. And then after a while, your mind just no longer has any value with it. So forcing through to that completion is not always the best thing motivationally. But anyway, sorry. So coming back to the Atomic Habits, I've definitely found that valuable in terms of like thinking through what actions am I being deliberate with, how much I struggle with some things, and maybe I'm struggling with it because I just need to be consistent and formulate it into a habit, and it just becomes automatic at that point, like things like that. Another book that I was reading, I was tempted to pull it up on Amazon, but I can't remember exactly who wrote it, but it was talking about why we sleep. And that changed my perspective a lot about sleep, because what I used to do is like, in my first year in my master's, I used to brag and say, I never used to sleep on a Friday night because, Friday night was just finishing all my assignments and homework. And then Saturday morning, I was going to a photography class because I was interested in photography, and in the afternoon, I have all kinds of. So I used to just be like, sleep is optional. But then, like this book just opened my eyes to, again, his name just slipping me right now, but he's a doctor who studied like sleep science over several decades and stuff like that, and shows how even lack of sleep can be compared to like impaired driving, in terms of your ability to control motor skills and all. So it just changed my whole perspective on the value of sleep. And again, I think that's important in our culture because somebody was even saying, why sleep when I could be making money?
Yeah, I was, I used to listen to all those motivational talks, and every time I sleep, I get guilty. But my PhD, I napped a lot. Like the one thing that everyone remembers about me in my entire academic career is like, Mark was always sleeping under the desk. That's like the only thing that they have to say.
Oh man, we brothers of kindred spirit.
Yeah.
My professors used to make a joke about me about sleeping in the front of. I sat down in front because I wanted to pay attention, but my body just didn't let me. So I used to fall asleep. Yeah. Kindred spirit, man. So those are the two books that I'm reading right now.
Those are cool.
Yeah. So
great.
Eye openers.
So now you're gonna have a 3-year-old child. Hopefully, have a couple of minutes left.
3 months. 3 months.
3 months. Sorry, 3 months. My bad. And how do you intend? Well, first, how do you manage burnout, and how do you intend to manage burnout coming up?
Burnout is a really hard question. I'm thinking about that a little bit more deliberately these days.
Because you're that's also in like a part of your like mindset, right? Go, like what's next? And pushing.
And I think in the past, I haven't always been appreciative of burnout.
Okay.
Like my wife, my partner would laugh and say, because I used to go sit down, I'm going to do something at this desk, I'm going to work. And the next memory I have is waking up in the morning in the bed and like, how did I get here? When did I leave the desk? Right. And like the body just reached to the point where it's just like, I'm sorry, you could drink all the coffee you want to drink. You're not going to make it. Right.
Yes.
Which in itself is a symptom of burnout. Like that's physical burnout, but that's not even necessarily the worst type of burnout. So I think being more deliberate with family time, being more deliberate with, like what does a vacation actually look like? Like I have pleasant memories with my family doing things like ice cream on Sundays and stuff like that, and wanting to be able to recreate, some of these kinds of experiences for your own children. And again, I think like all of that too, even though, again, just word of caution, sometimes in the pursuit of something noble could itself become a stressor, right?
Yes.
But
indeed.
So I think like that's what I am thinking of a little bit more. I have a really great partner who is very conscious about me when it comes to these kinds of things. And so I know I have the support that I have there. I have family, even though they're all remote, but again, technology makes that a little bit less of an issue than it used to be, that keep me accountable to those kinds of things. And I think having an accountability structure is also important. And I'm building a community of friends in the Toronto region that also helps with that, who again are similar professionals with family. And so I think our needs are very similar to help manage all of those kinds of issues. I'm not sure if it's the best solution, and I'm open to suggestions, but so far that's where I am.
Cold showers too. Cold showers and naps.
Mark, a cold shower when you're in Toronto?
Well, that's a different story. I ain't lying to tell you. I ain't lying to tell you. So I get into all this like Wim Hof cold shower thing, right? So I go into Colorado and I open the water, the cold water. I say, no, that ain't no cold shower. Florida cold shower is different to like Colorado and Canada. That makes sense.
That's a true talk here. Like I went 20-something years of my life without hot water, right? Like it was so funny because one time when she was my fiance at that point, visited my parents in St Vincent. My father actually installed a water heater into the bathroom that my brother and I used. And we were like, all the years we've been suffering with cold water, right? You know, it was just like, but boy, that water that comes out of that pipe, that's a different level of cold.
No. I thought I was ready. Trust me, I wasn't ready. That shit was too painful.
Yeah. But you're right, you know, sometimes just a nice refreshing bath shower.
Yeah.
You know?
And like that afternoon. So what I've noticed at least is, you know, I monitor cortisol very, 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 I'm very acute to my cortisol levels, because your cortisol levels could really wreck like everything downstream, right? Yes. And so I think just like that, going, and then your weight loss, I'm super aware of, as your cortisol is very high. Like if I don't get good sleep, like my whole body starts to inflate and whatnot. So
I would send you the link to the book about sleep, because he deals a lot with cortisol and sleep as a function for managing cortisol levels. And again, like all of this eye opener for me, because I was like, if I get 4 hours sleep and I wake up the next morning and I feel okay, I got enough sleep, and it just opened my eyes to think about it differently. Yeah.
Fantastic. So is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience before you left? I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully found a hardworking friend to be like, hey, you're a semi-workaholic. Like, what are you gonna do differently now?
Oh man, I sure appreciate that as well. You know, like I think being conscious of your time. Like I think maybe the only thing that I regret when I look back, like there was a lot of things that like sometimes people will be like, oh, let's do something, and I'll be like, oh nah, I'm kind of busy, you know. And like I look back at it and I was like, was I really that busy that I couldn't do that thing? Like I could not have made up the time. Like so I'm not downplaying that. I think it felt necessary at the time. But you look back and you're like, was that really as necessary as I think it was?
Yes.
You know, so like when you're faced with those kind of decisions, like even now, like I don't tell people I'm busy anymore. It's more like, let me know. I'll see if I could make time, you know?
Okay.
You know,
that's a cool perspective.
Yeah. Even with the baby, like, oh man, in your mind, you have a mental image of how much time a baby is going to take. I don't even know why we bought up. It's not nothing. Yeah, and like I was talking to my partner, and I told her, I said we need to just reshape our thinking and our language. It's not about when I get time, because we'll never get time. And this is just one, right? Wow. It's just like if we need to do something, we need to just figure out how to get the time, how to make the time, how to position, how to organize the time in order to do something. And like I think I've always done that, but I never really challenged that language. And I think if I thought about it in that language, then I would have been able to make more time to do more things with people, with friends, and that kind of stuff like that. So as a core borderline workaholic, I don't know if I call it a workaholic per se, but as a fellow person in that dynamic or range, I think that's just the warning and the caveat, you know, like if you find yourself saying too often, or at least people turn around and say, well, we didn't invite you because we know you're busy. That's like a sign,
right.
A warning sign. Like, what is the projection that I'm giving to people? And again, we talk about data science and machine learning and success and stuff like that. It's not valuable to be successful and lose people along the way.
Right.
And again, more that you become successful is the more that you need to network, the more that you need to build relationships. All of it is related. Don't isolate it, don't compartmentalize it. It's valuable.
Yeah, the one thing that resonated there with me, I've been thinking a lot for a while, is lime faster. Like, you got to hang out. All right. I just look back at my whole teenage years and like, I wasted so much time just doing nothing. I could have just compressed all that nothingness into like a quarter of the time, and then I would be so much further along. So it's slightly inverse for me. It's like, how do I compress all of the fun or time that is so quote unquote wasted, not like achieving certain things you're trying to go for, and at least tell young people that like your time is so valuable, and if you just manage it right, the sky is the limit type thing.
And so I think we are a good balance to each other, because it's important for them to realize you could swing the other direction and totally still screw it up. So I definitely agree with you. Don't waste time, but at the same time, don't see building meaningful relationships as a waste of time.
Yes.
But if you're liming every Friday from how we used to do like 10 in the evening. We start liming at 10 and we reach home at 4, and you're doing that every week.
And then your whole sleep schedule just mess up for like the rest of the week, and you're gone.
I would say at that point, you need to rethink. Can you have the same kind of bonding with friends, quality bond? Because I mean, again, we're getting a little preachy here, like,
sure.
How much are you really bonding when you go out and do that? Like, maybe there's another way to bond. I'm just saying, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying, like, when you're thinking about setting yourself up for success, you have to critically look at all of these things and say, is there a way for me to get the same outcome with less time, than what I'm doing? That's all we saying to ask,
Optimize, right? Hey,
That's
Kyle,
right.
I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope the listeners, extract the same motivation to go push themselves responsibly. Let's call it that way.
And sustainably.
Yeah, that's a word. So yeah, really appreciate you spending the time with us, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. All right, Mark. It was good making this link, and I'm sure when I'm coming down to Florida, we'll meet in person.
Man. Yeah, man. Vibes.